Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots, where we reclaim virtue to bring it to our home and yours. And I'm Thomas McCuddy.
And I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Nick Wiegand. And tonight we are talking about the balance of nobility with humility, especially when it comes to raising our children. So I want to begin by defining the virtue of nobility, just so that we can even have something to work with, because it's not a term that we use often.
It's one of those terms that we struggled with for a while because one of the main virtues of fortitude, and fortitude is pursuing the good when it's difficult. Okay, so that's where you have courage, we have bravery, we're familiar with those. Two major virtues that came out, really the Latin word magnanimity, big word, just meaning that a person is a big soul. They have a noble purpose, and that was kind of the reason we sort of landed on that idea, the virtue of nobility, that you're the kind of person who aspires to do great and noble things, that it requires a special virtue, because it's one thing if you're just trying to do a little something that's hard and persevere and push through. Like, as we talk about needing fortitude, we were just talking about the idea of like running a 5K would be something that a lot of people do. This is the kind of thing that, you're able to train, you do this, push through. But there's something different. We look at running a 5K versus, somebody who's wanting to compete professionally in gymnastics or something. You're like, that's going to require so much more. Mm-hmm. That's going to require a dedication and a level, and they're going to be doing things that a very small portion of the people will do. And that's the whole idea of having that virtue to do this great task. So nobility is where we land it, because magnanimity is just kind of too big of a weird word. And it's expressed by when people are answering their calling, and it doesn't have to be the kind of thing that, like save the world kind of thing, but when you're considering your calling and you think about this task is like so far out there, it's such a big thing, and you almost feel like, all right, God is going to have to help me get there, do that. That's when you're in that area of nobility.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. So I guess nobility doesn't actually, the way you kind of described it, it's a great task, but it doesn't seem as if it has to have a moral good associated with it. It can be something as simple as a sport at a high level, or does it have to have some sort of moral good with it? I know we're talking through a Christian worldview,
mm-hmm.
but a lot of these virtues have been handled completely outside of the Christian worldview as well. So, like, what is there something that has to be done morally for nobility, or is it just like a bigger version of fortitude?
Everything has to, in some sense, be directed towards what is true and good and beautiful. So if you're doing some sort of, like, take a sport, for example, and you're going to win, the big trophy, but you're doing it for completely self-serving
Mm-hmm.
purpose, you're not in the realm of the virtue of nobility. It's still a great task. Most people look at that and they're like, wow, look at what you did. But what makes it the virtue is that you're doing these things for the right reason.
Well, so this is interesting, like even using sports as kind of the example. Yeah, and I know there's obviously far better examples, but I think sports is an interesting one because I know we often see parents and their children in sports, they push them too hard, or they act a fool at games, or, the sport really becomes about the parents' missed opportunities in life instead of the child itself. So I think this is an interesting one, because I think there's definitely a role that the parent ought to have to ensure that child, even if it is a noble feat, whether it's sports or music or, anything, like they're going to have that role.
Well, and this is kind of a balance that I'm actually foreseeing going through in the next few months. My older son likes basketball, but it's fun for him. He just wants to play. my middle son he thinks he wants to be a professional basketball player. Like he's been into the sport, he's obsessed with it. He's learning everything about it. He knows all the players on the professional teams. He knows what they're all these different stats. Like he's learned in a very short time. It's obviously consumed his attention and he loves it. And I think that there's good in it. I think that learning a sport and just learning that fortitude itself as with a focus on some noble task in the future, which you're sacrificing a lot now for the future. Like he's going to sacrifice his time. He's going to sacrifice like all these different things, like, just to do this bigger thing. But I have to keep this as a parent, put it in perspective, because is this like learning this sport and being proficient in it, is it going to get in the way of his spiritual development? Like, is there things that these sports shouldn't interfere with? I know, especially Sundays, I know that we've lost members at our church because their kids play travel sports, and I don't know what their ambition for their kid is. They think they're going to be professional or what, but they've teaching them at a young age that the sport takes precedence over the relationship with God.
So you're saying that the job as the parent, for just the nobility side of it, the job of the parent is to ensure that we maintain our priorities.
I think
and
so.
That we continue to teach them and instill in them, God is first, and then we have family, and then we work through.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So then the topic of conversation is balancing that feat, that great thing, with humility as well.
Yes.
So this is a topic of conversation that I deal with a lot in counseling, and I deal with a lot in the church. So do me a favor and define what humility is.
Humility is going to have a right view of yourself. So we balance humility. On the one side, we're familiar with pride, and you have an overinflated sense of your own importance. It becomes about you. And you go even further, we have words like hubris, this just absolute wild pride and arrogance. On the other side, with the excess of this is going to be a self-deprecation, a looking down on yourself and not seeing yourself as you truly are, seeing yourself less than you are. Because and this is why it's not virtuous, is because there's no good in seeing yourself as something you're not, whether it's something better than you are or something worse than you are. And that's why Jesus, Moses, everyone else in Scripture, they were humble, but they also were very secure in exactly who and what they were.
Yeah. Right. And I think the idea, I just want to stress it, a right view of yourself. And so it's important because I think when in our Christian circles, we're taught humility is a very important attribute. It's a very important virtue to have. And so many Christians then act that out and create this false humility. And they actually talk less of themselves than they are. And like the idea of even saying they're good at something is hard for them to do because we've like kind of warped what this idea of humility is.
And I find that, and I'm sure you've probably seen this in the counseling realm as well, is that when people with that false humility or that kind of extended with self-deprecation type of humility, they tend to like more, because a lot of them push away compliments and they don't believe when people are saying that they're doing good. And I think that also feeds into a state of depression. You begin believing that. I think as we're talking about the noble task, looking at what we could become in the future, because that's what we're doing. We're sacrificing now for something bigger in the future, and we're relying on God to guide us there. If we don't have that, because I would say that's a complete opposite of what we're talking about with magnanimity and the idea of that noble task, because they don't believe that they're capable of doing it. They have it in their hearts that they're like, I'm never going to be able to live up to that, even remotely their standard. And I find it's huge. And I think that stagnates so many people in just not seeing their potential in life just by their own lack of confidence in themselves in that way.
And so I think you're kind of keying in on something, is that we had an entire generation of parents that would parent their children telling them they're the best at everything. And they're greatest that's ever walked the planet, and they're so beautiful, and they're so smart, and they're so talented, and they're so good, and they can be anything they want, and they've got all the, they're so intelligent when they could be dumb as a box of rocks, and they're the fastest runner when they're the slowest in the entire class. Like I think we had a generation that has built this idea that we're just gonna puff up our children instead of balancing a right view of themselves, but then while still building them up and making them realize that they're capable of far more than they think they are. So that's an interesting dynamic from the parenting view.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that we don't want to tear them down, but I think this entire conversation right on this part is really revolving around honesty with our children and not just saying things that just aren't true.
And also knowing your children's disposition. Like my older son he trends more into self-deprecation in his personality. That's where he trends. And I purposely try to lift him up and encourage him in many ways and show him, like, because he's thinking less of himself. I'm like, here's who you really are. This is what you're capable of doing. And it gives him, I try to build that confidence. My middle son, on the other hand, he trends in the opposite direction where he's more prideful. And so I have to bring him down a few pegs and give him a reality check sometimes. My wife does too. It's just like, because I don't want him to think like this way. It's not good to be in that state of mind on either end of the spectrum. But
I'm going to be honest. It sounds really awful what you just said. So give us an example. That you have to take your kid down a couple notches. I'm just going to be honest. It sounds terrible. So give us an example.
Well,
so it's not ambiguous in nature. So we
have.
So we either know you're horrible or
I could be horrible. I'm horrible.
Give us an example of what you mean by that.
It's just like my son. Like he already had because he's thinking that noble thing, but he already sees himself there. It's almost like he just like. Like I appreciate it, I love it, but then the way he thinks about himself and like how he visions himself, he doesn't see, and he's like almost not realizing the many ups and downs it's going to take to get to where he wants to be. And
so then, how do you bring him down a couple of notches?
Make it a reality to him, and tell him precisely when he starts to exaggerate his own. I tell him like, well, pump the brakes a little bit. You gotta understand that, you're just learning, you've only been doing this for so long. And I want to encourage him. I don't want to like discourage him, but at the same time, I'm trying not to allow his ego to inflate to a large level.
So you try to bring him into a right view of himself.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that I just start like saying,
well, you think you're good at basketball? Watch this. I'm going to dunk on you.
Well, and that's another thing. And there is this kind
that's
of.
what it sounded like.
Well,
he's like, oh, I'm going to knock him down. Knock him down a couple of
notches. There
is
that because he'll go out there and talk about all these kids, and you're like this one and that one, and I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's me and you play. And he still hasn't beaten me yet, so it's a.
this conversation has turned
on a practical level. What this looks like is, in the case of my boys, sometimes I have to remind them of their flaws. They forget that they're flawed, but other times we have to highlight their strengths and highlight what they're good at.
I'm going to make sure we're clear here, because people are going to hear this and be like, "I've never listened to these guys again. They're awful." No, but I mean, if I think if you think about it truly in each of our lives, like we all need to be reminded.
Oh yes,
we all do. But I think what's really important is what you're both saying is that we also build our children up.
Yep.
And so I have lots of examples in my counseling session. Lots of examples in counseling sessions where parents just had always wanted to knock their kids down a couple of notches. And it was never balanced with anything else. There was never the other end of it. And so I think it's important that we have that, like, and I want to stress that you're not saying that's all we're doing, that you're saying like, look, we have to build our children up.
Oh yeah.
But we also need to make sure that they have a right view of themselves, so we don't create another entitled generation of children that just think that they're better than literally everything and anything that's ever walked.
Well, and give a good example, just more on a serious, more about what I actually do. Is like I watch my son play and I play with him, and I think that's part of it. I'm paying attention to what he really wants, because I remember when growing up, that was something my dad and I never had. He just kind of always, that kind of brought me down pegs, didn't care much about what I was interested in. And so I make a point as a parent myself to really care about what my kids are into so that we can have that, we have that common ground that shows that I'm interested in it. So Sammy and I will go out, we'll play together, and I'll see improvement in his jump shot. And I'll make sure that I tell him that I'm like, yeah, you're doing really good. I can tell you're working on this. But there's also these other areas you need to work on too. Maybe you can try this, like giving him that constructive criticism where, being honest with him without trying to exaggerate, give him the props where he deserves it, but also showing where he can improve in different areas. So he always has this attitude where he's not like, he hasn't arrived there yet. It takes a lot of work, and I'll be alongside him. I'll be honest to him. I think looking back, he's going to appreciate that. At least I hope that, like, Dad, you were there and, you pushed me when I needed to be pushed. And, you were there to, puts me in the right state of mind so that I can come better. Because that's ultimately, I want him to succeed. And if you have an inflated idea of yourself, you're not, you're going to kind of, another way of thwarting your progress is thinking too highly of yourself. And then, getting, like we talked a little bit before about getting grades, like all of a sudden you get a B and you're an A student and that deflates you. It's good to have a little bit of that, if as you're trying to go forward, if you want to succeed, to have a proper understanding.
Well, I think this is what brings this whole conversation up, is that if you've got somebody and they have a low view of themselves and they're suffering in self-esteem, I think that's what parents find the easiest. That's where you begin complimenting. This is when you're recognizing what's good, lifting them up. I think,
but without flattery.
Without flattery, correct.
Correct. Do me a favor, define flattery. I'm the one. I'm used it, but you're the one talking. So define flattery for me.
Flattery is going to be. We actually use that as our vice of the overly friendly, like you're just saying things that aren't necessarily true. It's just you're over the top with it,
ingratiating.
Yeah, and so when we have kids who are actually excelling and doing really well, I think that's why all of a sudden, to even use that language of, okay, we need to knock them down a peg. We need to bring them back more to where they really are. I think there's a lot of parents who would push back on that. Oh, no, you don't ever bring them down. But there needs to be this balance that I'm not saying make them do worse, like on the issue, whether it's sports, whether it's the musical talent, whatever it is they're doing, if they're excelling and they're doing well and they're achieving and they're moving out, there needs to be with it a rightly centered view of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if that view of the self is tending towards that area of pride, towards, hey, you're doing really well. Yeah, I am. Okay, we need to have a conversation.
Well, I think
we need to that's where we've got to engage and recognize, if we don't help them maintain that proper level of humility and proper view of self, that's going to escalate and lead into a lot of other vices, a lot of other places where you get into, you can even get into the whole idea of entitlement, like, well, I'm good, I deserve better, I deserve these kinds of things.
They get there quickly because people look at them, especially if they're succeeding, and especially in a sport, they look at them as on a higher level. People just naturally give them that attention.
Well, I've done a lot of hiring in the job market, and I've had a lot of people work for me, and I've done some firing, which I don't like, but have to. I think one of the traits that I look for the most is this sense of teachability.
Mm-hmm.
So that teachability is, look, I want this noble task. I want to do this thing, this because I used to work in an environment that was excellent. Like, it was just pursued excellence. And so, like, they want this noble task, but if they're not teachable, if they can't receive that criticism that we're talking about, if they just close off, and we find this in our hiring process, then they have absolutely no chance of success. And now I'm in construction, and I know it doesn't sound the same, but it's still the exact same thing that I look for.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to read Philippians 2:3-4. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. And I want to balance that with Ruth 3:11 as well. Or, I mean, not balance it, but shore that up. And it says, "And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a noble woman." And so, this idea of just this character of nobility is what Ruth had. So, it doesn't even necessarily have to be the monumental task. It can be a character, a worthiness that we just have at all times. But balancing that humility and that not doing it out of conceit, which is I think really kind of where we're headed to. Some kids, I know we focus a lot on sports because it's just kind of one of the easier ones to show. Where are the other places in our children's lives that we really need to make sure we're working on the balance of these two virtues?
But I think education as well. We can, I mean, it's good for them to be as educated as possible, but that grade, they can chase that grade and kind of miss the, actual learning, like for the good, enjoying it for that purpose. And I think, I think Thomas is about to say the same thing. It just, we can, we want our kids to succeed and we want them to aspire, but then and we think about virtue itself. There's so many smart kids they lack good character and they lack certain aspects that are missing by just focusing on their education or by just, they have that noble idea of going to college, get their master's degree, become whatever. And, it's good. But, the parents tend to just focus on that and they give them, point them in that direction without also training them in good character. So when they get those positions in the future or they get that, success, they don't know how to handle it. And because they don't have the character to back it up. And
So I would argue that it's not good. It could be good. And I just want to make sure that, from my standpoint, I'm not as pro college as some people, but college in and of itself and all of its essence is not good. But it could absolutely be good.
it could be good, yeah.
In the right way for the right student and the
exactly.
right reason. But there are kids who absolutely should not go to college.
Yep.
Like they should have absolutely no, it's not good for them. They're forced into it. It's not good. So it could be good, but that's doing the right thing for the wrong reason that we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
But I think even that noble task in academics, that particularly for one who has, like, students who have learning disabilities, the fact that for them to be able to sit and read a novel might be a noble purpose, might be,
that's good. That's good.
That's where we recognize, and this is why I think that there's an element with when we're referring to, well, noble task, it's not the same for everybody. And that goes back to some of our own dispositions, our own calling. But anything that we're doing, and this is why with our kids, whether it's the sports, the grades, music, art, whatever it is, even community service, there's some who they just like to serve and they do kind of these incredible things. All of those things are good. They are goods in and of themselves. Like they are making the world a better place, making the person better. The whole concern we have when you balance with things like humility, if you don't have humility mixed in with this, then all of these things are going to end up being done for the wrong reason.
Mm-hmm.
And you take these good things, whether it's playing a symphony, whether it's making good grades, whether it's competing in some sort of not just sports, but even academic competitions or art or whatever it is, that I think that's what parents, many times, it falls off their radar. They're not cognizant. They're just thinking, oh, but they're doing such wonderful things, and they're forgetting that if you do the right thing for the wrong reason, it's not virtuous. It's not good. And it doesn't even bring glory to God because you've taken that for yourself.
Yep.
Just like the Pharisees who would give massive amounts of sums of money, but God's like, you have your reward.
Yeah.
You're not doing this at all for the right reason. And then you have the widow who took her, the equivalent of like, what, 2 pennies?
Yeah.
The noble task she did was that in her poverty, for whatever reason, she was like, there's somebody who needs this more than I do,
Right.
and gave that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why when we look, and I think that's a great illustration of a noble purpose, that even in her situation, she sought the good of others as well.
I think you said a lot of really interesting things there, but So often we push our kids into doing things that we deem good, but they're only doing it because they're either being forced to or they're trying to make mom and dad happy, as opposed to truly pursuing a good and righteous thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the conversation as always. You can find us at familiesofvirtue.com and our podcast, Virtuous Roots, on all of the major streaming platforms. We will talk to you next time. Stay blessed.